Well, thank you very much for having me today, actually. It's very exciting to be at such a kind of a globally renowned institution for sort of pioneering energy technology, and it's seemingly a bit bizarre given how far behind the UK is in many parts of its electricity industry that I've even been invited here today. But and as an economist and not a sort of a engineer technologist, you think a lot about the why, and I've thought a lot about the why over here while I'm coming over here to present, and you think actually it's because we're so far behind that demand response has been quite successful in the UK. No national strategic energy plan for a long time has led to a chronic underinvestment in capacity and networks, which has given a strong signal for the need of demand response in the UK. But now, with that benefit of hindsight and the fact that we have developed a working and functional demand response market, you begin to analyze again a bit about the why. And what I want to do a lot today is sort of dispel a few myths, I think, that are emerging globally around the demand response industry. And what I hear when I travel around Europe, sort of talking about demand response as a technology and why it's what I believe and why Open Energy believe it's so transformationally important to the electricity industry, is because I think there are a few myths out there. Demand response isn't a technology that you wait for until you don't invest in the capacity. It is not a technology that is there to as a response to underinvestment in capacity. It's a driver that enables you to begin to create a market space, but once you've created that market space, you recognize actually demand response is a technology that is essentially, when done properly, the answer to storage at a price point that is all the benefits that consumers can benefit from. So don't wait until you don't have an investment in capacity like the UK. You can begin to create transformational changes to the electricity industry before that point comes. The other thing I'd say is it's not just to compensate for the intermittent renewable energy systems as well. I mean, demand response, if we could have had it 70 years ago, would have been a very exciting technology to have 70 years ago. But again, renewable energy generation and the intermittency in renewable energy generation does actually speed up the requirement for demand response as well. But it's not just because of our movement towards renewable energy that demand response is interesting. And then from a technology perspective, demand response is not Big Brother coming into your businesses and your houses to turn off devices when you want them to come on. That is bad demand response. Demand response is something that works within the existing control infrastructures of appliances that can switch off and can switch on. It is something that is trying to boost the productivity of the system. If the electricity system wants something to turn off, but your businesses don't make money because of it, that is not something that is benefit to the system. It is a technology that benefits the system and consumers to make the whole pie bigger. So what I want to spend a bit of time is really sort of explaining why demand response is such an exciting technology. But understandably, I'm here at an engineering institution, and I'll go on a little bit onto the what and how Open Energy are doing what we're doing, and maybe we can do a bit of a Q&A afterwards to get a bit more into the details of how the technology is exciting. So, Open Energy, I've noticed that a few people have told me that we spelt it the Danish way. That's quite, it's more coincidence, it's quite nice. It's actually because I think the Y was taken when we were trying to create a company, and because the PR agency really liked the name, we had to think on our feet, and we went with the GE. But it's nice that I'm in the right country for it. So Open Energy was founded actually quite a long time ago. It was founded in 1999, which is quite a long time to be around for a technology industry. And for a long time, we were just this vision of how every technology company should start, really, as sort of a crazy inventor in his loft with a big beard. I guess I'm sort of following in his footsteps. But he had this vision that was all the thermally controlled devices out there could be automatically responding to system issues and balancing the grid second by second, free, basically. Because when you are automating demand and response to system issues, the marginal cost of delivery is effectively nothing. You are embedding that technology into devices pretty cheap, and responding to signals is very cheap. Now, you might be surprised, but investors didn't like the word free. how would you build a business that's effectively delivering something for free? I mean, it doesn't make any sense. So that's where, unfortunately, people like me, economists, came in and got really boring to the inventors who realized there's something so exciting that could happen. But that foundation that you can effectively control demand in very exciting ways is still part of our vision, because effectively it is what is driving us, that you can balance systems incredibly cheaply if we can build market spaces to incentivize it. So it might seem a bit trite and a bit trivial to explain how the electricity value chain works to a room of industry professionals, but it's really important to understand what demand response is trying to displace. Now, I would like to add, a lot of this stuff, slide material, is based on the UK market, which is, as I said, lagging behind a lot of what is happening in Denmark, so don't be offended, just be proud of what your nation is doing. It is considerably more advanced than the UK. But essentially, the electricity value chain is something that in many countries, not outside of Denmark, which has got a significant amount of renewable energy penetration, is something that hasn't really changed for a long time. Not really since the dawn of the Industrial Revolution and the first ever commercial power station in London have we really looked at sort of changing the way we do things. And what exists in this electricity supply chain is just chronic inefficiency that comes from the fact that you can't store electricity. And we all know that and we all understand it, but fundamentally, we pay for that inefficiency. All of us pay for that inefficiency, the latent inefficiency built into the supply chain. So just to kind of go through this inefficiency a little bit, I mean, fossil fuel production is something we're all trying to move away from for the purposes of climate change and for the purposes of sort of energy security, and also because when you have a fully functioning electricity market that is based on renewable energy, where the marginal cost of production is zero, and you have a demand response system that is reacting to those systems, which the marginal cost of production is zero, you get to a place which has transformationally societal benefits, where you're running an electricity system very cheaply. So, but if you move to centralized power generation, this is where you meet the first chronic inefficiency of the electricity system. Now, this graph is based on the UK, and as I said, we face a lot more inefficiencies in the UK system because we're an island. We're an island, which means we're all a bit strange because we don't get out to Europe that much and we don't get to speak to people that often, but we're also, it means it's very difficult to run an electricity system. So we probably have a lot worse utilization rates of our current infrastructure than many parts of Germany do.
I'll help you.
Sure.
I can see. I think you have put it on the wrong way.
Was it coming up backwards? There we go, thank you very much.
Yeah, it's one of the advantages of being managing this is we can got the
Perfect.
ability.
Thank you very much. Anyway, so what this graph shows you in the UK is that we have about 135 gigawatts of installed generation capacity in the UK. The majority of that is in gas, coal still, nuclear, and we are still rather embarrassingly behind on wind. But what in the light grey it shows you is that the utilization of that plant last year was used about 35 gigawatts of that plant. That means 75% of the time the current generation infrastructure in the UK is not being used. Now, some of that's a little bit mean and a little disingenuous. A lot of that plant every now and again has to be offline for maintenance purposes. But what this highlights is the notion of peak electricity and how inefficient it is. And if we could manage demand more effectively, instead of building unnecessary power stations, you could transform the energy industry. If you could get utilization rates up there, you would have transformational effects on the wholesale power price, reducing the cost of delivery of electricity to consumers, reducing the need to build more power stations, and all at zero carbon if you could manage demand more effectively. So that's one of the first chronic inefficiencies you get of the electricity industry. Next, you get to transmission and distribution. In the UK, is of my understanding, that lots of the networks run at about 60%. So therefore, about 40% of the time, the networks are doing nothing. Of the 130 substations in London, very few are actually reaching peak capacity. Yet, some are reaching those points where we need to invest in that infrastructure. If we could find a way of managing demand more effectively, you don't have to invest in unnecessary infrastructure. And that, again, has transformational effects on the cost of energy and how we deliver it to you. Now, then it's the job of the electricity supplier, to buy in all this fossil fuel, buy power more expensive than it needs to be because of the inefficiency, spend more money giving it to the transmission and distribution network than it needs to because it's inefficient, and then bundle up and give that to the consumer. Now, what I want to highlight is that even before we moved to the system of wind power, and even before we recognized in the UK that we hadn't invested enough generation capacity, an ability to use demand more effectively would make that value chain really, really, really more efficient. Because effectively what we've always ever done is looked at demand and said, right, that's a static thing, let's go build a whole value chain to deliver it. That means building all these networks, building these power stations, building trading links. In the UK especially, we still buy huge amounts of coal from South Africa, Australia, Colombia, all because we've decided that demand, that stays there, that's static, you can't change that. So we have to go create this whole inefficient value chain. Now, the reduction in the cost of communications technology has come down to such a point that we now can real-time monitor and measure pretty much everything we do. Now that's the real driver for demand response. The real driver is not the change to renewable energy system, it's not an underinvestment in generation and network capacity, it is the fact that we are moving to this idea of the Internet of Things. This idea where we can connect up and instrument our machinery and understand the way we use things in new ways that we never knew we could do before. And that's the real driver for this. And that is something that is universal. That's what's so exciting about demand response is, whilst it might be needed in certain places a little bit sooner than everywhere, this idea of connectivity and the cost of communications technology, that is universally becoming cheaper, which is very exciting. So then we move to this idea of this thing called the new energy economy. Now, in the UK, we've decided to get to this new energy economy, which is to meet our EU carbon reduction commitments and the upgrades in backup capacity and networks. To get this, we've decided we need to spend about £110 billion. Now, as a consumer, you just think that's a cost to your business. You don't, that £110 billion that is needed investment will feed through your bills. What is not understood at a policy level in the UK still yet, even though demand response is moving quite quickly because of this need for it, is that actually quite a significant amount of that money does not need to be spent. If we say that, I think conservatively that 10% of all demand in the UK has an element of flexibility in it, you take that 10% of £110 billion, that's about 11 billion, that could go straight into the pocket of all consumers if they learnt how to make their demand interact with the system in a far more intelligent, smart, and intuitive way. What demand response is essentially about is a huge transfer of value from what's the old electricity system, generation, fossil fuels, networks, suppliers, a huge transfer of value from them to the consumers. Now that could come via savings or by demand response revenue schemes. But what this is about beginning to turn the electricity value chain on its head and make consumers participate and interact the very heating in this room into the electricity market, and make them benefit for it and make the whole cost of the system run more effectively. Now, the slide I think that is the most important slide in my whole presentation is this. And this is the thing that means that demand response is not going to go away regardless of policy, because it will keep coming back at you because of this slide. Because building a megawatt's worth of capacity from a demand response context is so transformationally cheaper than any other competing technology. It is there to make electricity systems run way more efficiently. It's basically 10 times cheaper than its nearest alternative, be it batteries, pumped hydros, or power stations. I mean, the bars there give you a sense of the range of how expensive it is. Some power stations are cheaper than others. Now, the reason demand response technology is so cheap is for two reasons. One, the marginal cost of operation is data, and we all know where that data is going. It is a cost that is coming down all the time. Data storage, data communications, these are things that are not things that are going up anywhere in the world. These are tending to one place. But the idea is, from the actual capital cost, is very cheap. Now, I went to see a presentation the other day by a lady called Robin Chase, who's the CEO of a company called Zipcar. For those who don't know Zipcar, it's an American, it's been quite successful in other parts of Europe, car sharing technology. And her presentation says the answer to the world's problems is to build internet-driven companies that look to exploit the idea of excess capacity in existing infrastructure. Because if you can leverage excess capacity in existing infrastructure, you can grow scale very quickly and very cheaply. Her main example was a company called Airbnb. Some of you might have heard of Airbnb, others of you might not have. Essentially, it is a platform to advertise a room or when it's not in use, or your whole house when it's not in use. The wasted asset here is your house. Houses can be the most expensive assets that we'll ever buy in our lives. And if you think of it, they're a bit inefficiently used sometimes. Quite often, we might go away from the weekend, and there's economic value to that house when you're not there. Or you might have a room that's not in use. And what they've done is they've created a very slick platform where you can advertise these things for these assets that aren't in use at all times, and create a very easy marketplace for people to come and use these assets that aren't wasted. And what have they done? They built the biggest hotel chain in the world within 4 years, because they haven't had to invest in a single piece of concrete or anything to build this hotel chain. Demand response is looking to do the same thing. Being able to measure and monitor certain types of demand in real time mean that we can access micro amounts of storage in all the different assets that we have, kilowatts from a heating appliance, kilowatts from a water pumping system, kilowatts from a cold storage unit or something like that. And when you aggregate all this up, you create power stations worth of electricity that you can move in real time, and you haven't had to build a single piece of it. You just have to build the infrastructure to connect it up, which I will get onto because it's definitely still not as easy as I'm making it sound, but fundamentally the economics behind building this virtual power station idea is very favorable, because you are looking to leverage existing infrastructure. You're looking to leverage a cold storage or a food manufacturing plant in new ways to eke productivity out for that cold storage unit, make them make a little bit more money out of the energy they're using, and provide capacity to the system. Now this is the graph that is driving the demand response industry globally. And it's the reason why it's here to stay, essentially. Now, I've kind of gone through the sort of visionary thing, why is it so exciting? But hopefully a room full of engineers would say is, yeah, but how does it actually happen? What are you actually doing? So from an economics context, these are the different value streams that you can make money out of demand response. Where most demand response markets are operating as balancing services. Now, usually it's the role of the transmission system operator in most countries to ensure that demand and supply equal at all times so the lights don't go out. And this open energy is no different. This is where we are bidding pretty much all of our flexible demand into the UK balancing services market. And the way that usually operates is you have open markets whereby you have a certain amount of volume of demand that you aggregate from customers, you tender it into a market space that the transmission system operates, and then you sort of get revenue from the transmission system operator, and then you share revenue out to your customers. And most of these are open markets. Some of them are bilateral agreements you can have in place as well. For instance, large industrial plants in the UK have traditionally had bilateral agreements with the transmission system operator, which says, under certain times of stress, can you turn your steel mill off and you'll get some revenue for it. That is demand response. It's kind of crude, but it is demand response. Another area of value streams for demand response is in network optimization, essentially managing the flow of electricity on the networks at certain times of day. Again, these could be done via open markets, which is that you have a certain amount of capacity that you put in, and the distribution network or the transmission network buys that capacity from you, so at certain times of day when they have experiences peak flows or constraints on their system, they can buy in that capacity to manage the flow more effectively. But here you can also use time of use tariffs as a way, as a sort of a incentive to move flows around your networks in the way you want them. In the UK, the transmission system is essentially funded by time of use tariffs. They have a peak charge that they charge on customers, and industrial and commercial customers, for the 3 biggest peaks of the year. And they now, they get about a gigawatt's worth of response from industrial and commercial customers by charging people very, very high tariffs at peak times. Now, in the UK, as you may have heard of, and as Morten spoke about earlier, we are following this idea of having a capacity market. Now, I actually agree with him. I think it's a bit of a knee-jerk reaction to underinvestment in current capacity. It would be far better to build more connectivity with the UK. It would be far more efficient for electricity to look to connect further up with the UK instead of, in my opinion, going to be building unnecessary amounts of gas-fired power stations. But capacity markets are ways in which demand response can operate as well. But this last one, and the ones in light grey I've said these are the ones in the UK we don't currently have demand response in. It's pretty much all on the left. But energy markets is sort of where all demand response companies want to eventually head, because that's where you make the biggest amount of change in electricity systems. In the UK, the cost of electricity is about 40% related to the wholesale cost of energy. The rest is around networks, balancing, and then taxes. But the energy wholesale cost of energy is by far and away the largest cost in that electricity bill. And if you go back to this original slide here, if you are able to get better usage out of these plants, you begin to bring down the cost of wholesale energy massively. Now, problem here is you definitely need time of use tariffs to really sort of drive this forward. And these are things that haven't really been put in place yet globally in many places. But this is where demand response really wants to operate, because that's where you make the most amount of societal benefits by bringing down the cost of electricity. And that's where the most value would be from a demand response company. But there is where you need the most sort of regulatory change. So with that in mind, you get this issue in demand response, which is if demand response is widely deployed, where's the most benefit? But getting it widely deployed is quite hard. So there's misaligned benefits from the system to the individual. So if demand response was in every single business and every single domestic household, by far and away, the biggest benefit to the whole system would be in a reduction in the price of wholesale energy. If people are moving their demand around in relation to wholesale energy costs, that would have big effects on the whole cost of energy to the whole system. However, you need time of use tariffs to get there. So building a demand response business at the moment, instead of waiting for these regulatory changes, you actually, to the individual, it's far easier to build a demand response business around balancing the network, around tendering in kilowatts or megawatts amount of energy into balancing markets, building up this portfolio of demand, and then when you have this portfolio of demand, can you look to use it in wholesale markets? But to get to there, you do need to get to time of use tariffs. Now, that's what I'm going to do. Here, I'll tell you what I do. So Open Energy, the way we've decided to come at this is there are lots of different value streams of how to make money out of flexible demand. But because a lot of these value streams are a bit sort of complicated and you might not be able to do all at the same time and it's a bit of crossover in the economic value, you have to start somewhere. So Open Energy started by building what's called, I think Europe's called primary control, in the UK it's called frequency response. Essentially, frequency is the immediate indicator of demand and supply imbalance in the system. Frequency drops, shorter power, frequency rises, longer power. So Open Energy built a technology platform around managing frequency for the transmission system operating. Traditionally, this is done by pumped hydro systems, coal-fired power stations, or gas-powered generators in the UK. Now, we did this for two reasons, really. We did this because in the UK, frequency is quite volatile because we're an island system. You take one generator offline, it has a big effect on system frequency compared to it might happen in Europe, and therefore the transmission system operator pays the most for it. But also it's the easiest one to explain to customers because we're looking to change very little of their actual demand. We're only looking to make very small changes, a very small amount of time, so it's easier for them to go in there and sell the idea of demand response to industrial, commercial, consumer when you're looking to make very small amounts of changes at the time. One of the biggest barriers to demand response is not the system benefits, it's managing to convince consumers who for years and years and years have only looked at just reducing their kilowatt consumption, is telling them to actually change the patterns of their kilowatt consumption. That's very hard to do when essentially you've had consultants coming in at the top saying reduce your kilowatts at all costs, and you've got an exciting little technology company coming in from the bottom saying maybe don't listen to them and actually try and do something a little bit different. It's not always the easiest thing to do. So I think probably the most easiest way to sort of describe the technology is actually to just show you our dashboard live. So bear with me, I'm doing a bit of a sin in presentation and trying to use IT in the middle of it. But anyway, let's give it a go. Yeah, perfect. There we go. Right, it's not huge at the moment, but anyway. So this is live going on at the moment. So Open Energy predominantly works with large industrial and commercial customers because the economic case is far easier for us to go install our hardware where there's lots more demand connected to it. Now, on the bottom here, we have what we'd call this is our virtual power station working in real time. So in the green here, we have what we call high response. This is the amount of energy we can turn on, and the green at the bottom is the low response. This is the amount of energy we can turn off. Above, you have system frequency. So yeah, above you have system frequency, and therefore, when the frequency drops, you can see we turn off a small amount. When the frequency rises, we turn on a small amount. And we are always turning on and turning off what we need to do in direct relation to system frequency, because if we turned off everything we had when the frequency dropped, we would send the system into the wrong direction, and likewise if we turned on everything we had. So you're having to do a very linear tracking system. Now, most of this is coming from about 3 different sectors. We do a lot of work with the retail sector, supermarket sector, which have a lot of energy coming from heating, ventilation, and refrigeration. We do a lot of work with water utilities. If you think majority of the electricity consumption of water utilities is flexible. You can turn on and off pumps quite easily without having any effect on system pressure, the level of reservoirs, and then a lot of it is coming from other industrial food manufacturing businesses, universities. So anywhere where there is thermal controls or where there is pumping controls, there tends to be a lot of flexibility within there. We have really big ambitions for the water sector, because if you think in the water sector where you're just pumping water around a network, you're essentially creating a distributed storage system by pumping water around the network. And if you can connect into that industrial control system effectively, you can access huge amounts of stored energy at a very cheap cost. So this is essentially what we're doing live. But what I want to stress is, currently within this virtual power station, our control signal is system frequency. The reason our control system is system frequency is because we've got a very clear commercial relationship with the TSO that says, if you respond to system frequency, we'll pay you X pound per megawatt hour. It doesn't have to be system frequency that's making us switch things on and off. It could be a wholesale energy cost. It could be a network signal. And it's about building these stakeholder relationships with all these players in the electricity industry to make sure you're maximizing the value out of your virtual power station. Now that's quite difficult because it requires lots of people to be on the same page at the same time. You need the distribution networks to have a system in place where you can make money out of it. You need electricity suppliers or energy traders to have a system whereby they can see the value in it. But you have to start somewhere. This is why I knew this was going to be difficult. I need to go back now. There we go. This is just a small example. This summer, the back end of Hurricane Bertha, I think, came through the UK and created a... I knew this was going to be too dangerous to do. Oh, there we go. If I move around, maybe. Back end of Hurricane Bertha came through, created about a 200 megawatt surge in wind very quickly on the UK, and Open Energy responded by turning on about 30% of our loads, which was a bunch of water pumps, a bunch of commercial refrigeration units. We've also had a lot of success. You begin to find there is alternate stores of energy everywhere you look within demand. We've had a lot of success in bitumen tank, asphalt. You know, the tar on the road? In the UK, a lot of that is electrically heated. I never knew that, but you begin to find these things are magnificent stores of energy. You can turn these things on, they maintain their heat very easily. These alternative stores of energy might seem like a really difficult business to scale, but every business has their own flexibility within it, and when you can identify it and harness it, it is still transformationally cheaper than a battery because you don't have to build it. So I'm going to move through this. I want to come on to the challenges of building a demand response business, because there are a lot of challenges. The vision is clear. You can really transform electricity systems on their head because, in my opinion, when done well, it is the answer to storage. When done well, it is looking to turn off what we can turn off or turn on without affecting customers' performance. That's the most important thing. When you begin to affect consumer in the household or businesses and industrial businesses, you're not doing a very good job at demand response. You need to work within their control infrastructure to make them happy. But it isn't easy. The first reason it's easy is because you're having to look two ways at one time. You're looking at the electricity system and thinking, what do you need? And you're looking at customers and say, what do you need? And they're very different things. Quite often, if you build a demand response market just from the idea of what the electricity market needs, you're not going to get a lot of customers signing up to it. For instance, the capacity market in the UK, the specifications are, be ready to turn off within 20 minutes. That's fine. Most businesses might, get a phone call, say, can you turn some things off in 20 minutes? Yeah, I think we can understand what we can do. Then be ready to hold off indefinitely. Which business is going to do that? Which business is going to go, okay, I can turn my fridge off within 20 minutes? What? What, forever? That is not a good market for demand response to participate in. So you have to understand some of the sensitivities of what you're going to be able to get when you create certain market spaces. In the frequency response market in the UK, you have to be able to switch within 2 seconds. Now, that's a necessary requirement to keep the system working. We understand that. A lot of assets actually can't switch within 2 seconds. You have mechanical pumps, old mechanical pumps that actually, when you send a signal, it takes a long time for it to begin to switch off. But that's a bit more reasonable because the system needs that 2-second response. And it's Open Energy's job to then go, how can we make value out of this thing that can only switch within 5 minutes? So what we look to do is we work with commercial refrigeration units that can switch within 2 seconds but only hold for about 5 minutes before that system wants to come back on and keep food cold. And you build it with a pump that can switch within 5 minutes but can hold off for hours. And you see this idea of aggregation of all the different individual aspects of what demand can do, which is the powerful thing. So the hard thing is this idea that you're looking in 2 ways at once. And if I'm honest, I think the people who are going to win in the demand response world are the people who are a lot more consumer focused. It's about building up this understanding of what's possible for the consumer and then taking it to the electricity industry. That's why Nest have built a very, very successful business, because they've understand that demand response on its own is not that interesting. So they built a very nice and well-designed thermostat in the house that people want, and that has the ability to deliver demand response. And once that is widely deployed in millions of people's homes, and they go back to the electricity industry and go, look what we've got, that's a much more attractive proposition than trying to design what you think from the beginning and go out there and sell it. That's going to be hard. Also about flexibility of design of market spaces. Because so in the UK, the demand response market spaces are still really supply-side markets that demand response is trying to shoehorn our way into, essentially. It's not necessarily designed for demand response. The biggest thing demand response needs is it needs flexibility in terms of when you can tender. In the UK, we tender on a monthly basis. Now, if I have to understand what the heating appliance on this roof is going to be doing in 2 months' time, I'm betting against the weather. Now, Denmark, like the UK, I mean, betting against the weather, you'd be a rich man if you knew what you were doing. But so that's a barrier to trade in demand response, is making sure you can tender your load in very sort of flexible chunks. And also reduce the barriers to entry. In the UK, the minimum size for a demand response tender is 10 megawatts. That is not easy to build 10 megawatts of demand response. It actually used to be 3 megawatts. We're actually regressing because they did 3 megawatts in the transmission system, found it kind of difficult to manage all these new demand response. The biggest demand response market in the world is PJM on the eastern coast of the US. The reason? Because it's 100 kilowatts as the minimum tender size. That is very easy to get people to kind of begin to participate their load in. Understandably, that is hard for transmission systems when they're used to dealing with 5 power stations to then dealing with millions of individual consumers. That's where the role of aggregators come in, to understand how to sort of package all this stuff off and sell it to the transmission system. And the other thing which is really hard is this idea of demand response education. I spend most of my job actually not selling what we do, doing things like this, trying to understand why demand response is a really exciting thing. Because as I said, most companies for a long time have just said, just kilowatt reduction at all costs. That's what you do. We kilowatt reduce. Now I'm having to go to someone and say, actually, do you know what? You can turn on your fridges and I'll pay you for it. That's a really strange thing for a lot of businesses to try and comprehend when you're looking at this complete world of energy efficiency. But you try and transport people into 2050 and you've got 100% of your electricity coming from renewable energy generation. you're going to need to use your energy more effectively. So that's kind of a difficult thing to sell, is this notion of actually looking to use electricity at different times of day. And perhaps the biggest barrier to change is a massive contradiction to what I said at the beginning, is the Internet of Things doesn't really exist yet. In the sense that, in the Airbnb analogy I gave you, connecting up individual people's computers is far easier than connecting up machines that reside behind proprietary control networks that don't want to speak to each other. You have to spend a lot of money building software drivers to make all these individual controls companies speak to each other, and that's not easy. And that is where the biggest cost of building a demand response business comes. Open Energy have had a relatively significant amount of money invested in us today, and the majority about it has been enabling us to integrate into these demands. Quite often, and it's also, because this is a retrofit solution, quite often the most exciting things you want, they're pretty old. Like, it's pretty hard to go in there and connect it. We went to a port the other day in the UK that has a 3 megawatt pump to make sure that the port keeps at a certain water level when the tide is out. That is amazing. That pump was built in, I think, 1965. That thing is not ready for the Internet of Things. That thing was built way before the Internet existed, and trying to connect that thing into the Internet is not easy. It's like connecting my granddad to the Internet. It's like, it's not easy. This thing doesn't want to be connected to the Internet. So, and unfortunately, most of this exciting demand doesn't live in sexy places, and that's going to be the hard thing about connecting all this stuff up. Because going to that company and saying, actually just buy another pump, they might not have wanted to buy another pump for a while. So creating this technology platform to connect things up is one of the hardest things. But that's inevitability of what we're trying to do. Because if you say that a power station, a gas-fired power station, costs maybe £500 million to build, and you pay the cost of that asset off over the duration of that asset, which maybe takes 40 years or 30 years to pay off the financing, if you can build a virtual power station in half that price and half that timeline, you are delivering very big benefits to the electricity industry. So demand response needs to have a bit of an understanding of what we're trying to achieve. It's not going to come cheap, but when you've got it, it's very cheap to run. So that's my presentation. So if you want to ask any questions, then please let me know.
Keep it on.
Yeah, sorry.
Yes. Okay, thank you very much, David, for very interesting presentations. I mean, you've been focused on a lot of things that we actually work with here in iPower. So there's going to be a huge lot of questions for David. Who want to start? Oh, thank you, Lars.
Yeah, Lars Hensen from Energi. Thank you very much for a very interesting presentation. I do comply to a lot of the messages that you have put on the board here. One thing that I would like to ask you is, how do you deal with these interfaces you talked about? Do you go for some kind of standards, or have you invented your own communication standard? And how do you deal with cybersecurity?
So, two questions. On the cybersecurity front, these are clearly very, very important issues that we need to deal with. And as a sort of, as an industry, the Internet of Things, as an industry of this connected up sort of machinery, the cybersecurity is going to be a huge potential barrier to these efficiency gains. So, I mean, we have very tight security controls, and we have to comply by all of National Grid's security controls within our infrastructure, which means, essentially hacking into a nuclear power station is as hard as hacking into us. So we have to comply by all the same security standards that are set by National Grid. Going to more depth than that, you're going to recognize I'm an economist and not an engineer pretty quickly. So, but we are compliant by very strict, stringent control standards. On the idea of standards, we have as streamlined platform as possible. But that's to the point of getting to a site. And the aggregation engine is all as streamlined as possible, and we all work off completely off-the-shelf products. We use a box that is actually made by a company called Tridium, which is a subsidiary of Honeywell, and it's just an off-the-shelf product, which is a very powerful integration tool. You can put all your sort of modular software platform in there to integrate with things. But ultimately, there are no standards really in what we're trying to do at the moment. I mean, in America there's OpenADR, but OpenADR doesn't look and feel like what we want and what we need. We need things to switch quicker than OpenADR sort of looks at doing, and we want to do things in a bit more flexible way. So inevitably, there's no easy way to say it other than we have to look at everything on its merits. Everywhere we go, if the amount of power that we can access is worth of us spending, I don't know, 20,000, 40,000, 50,000 pounds on developing software, we'll have to do it. There's a business case for everything, but you look to sort of spread those costs over as many different things. The other thing is we work with a lot of controls companies to look to design our algorithms into the point of manufacture. So we work with quite a few large refrigeration controls companies, global refrigeration controls companies, to embed our algorithms within it, such that you kind of make it cheaper to sort of integrate with. And we work with a lot of large global building management systems companies. And once you've designed the software to work with one, you can spread that cost over many places. For instance, once you've worked with a Schneider BMS system, whilst there's an element of bespoke parts everywhere you go, you've got as much of a standardized platform as possible. But as I said, there's this difficult bit we're in whereby there's no standards, and we're trying to help create standards. We're working with a lot of Internet things companies are out trying to open up sort of standards to make it way easier for us to connect to it. But it's going to be a while until these things are agreed on globally, and you have to just work with what we've got at the moment. But it's not easy.
Ebbe Mønster, Plan Energi. I don't know if I missed it, but how many gigawatts have you actually in operation now, and how much is in the pipeline?
It's always the boring question. We have about 12 megawatts, not gigawatts, I wish. 12 megawatts of trading that we are currently trading with the national grid. It's important to understand that's a subset. Is that me doing that? It's important to understand that's about okay, cool. So that's a subset of about, if you ramped up every single device we had to its max, probably a subset of around 70, 80 megawatts, or a bit less than that, probably 60 megawatts of actual installed capacity of devices. But we are very, very focused on this concept of storage and availability within that, because if you just go around switching everything off, you're going to be kicked out of businesses pretty quickly. I mean, a supermarket is a supermarket. It's not a battery. It needs to be a supermarket first. Then look to see if you can make it a battery second. Everywhere you go, we are installed in UK water utility network. That is strategic national assets. If we stop that working, we stop water coming out of a tap, we're not going to be doing this for very long. So we have to take that very seriously, this idea of what's available within the subset of the total power. So 12 megawatts, subset of 60 megawatts. We have got about 50 megawatts in the pipeline. And you build momentum. We have big ideas for the water utility industry, because there is huge amounts of storage within that. And when one moves, the other one will move. Problem is, they tend to be quite slow-moving industries at the best of times. But we have to be patient and understand that we are a new sort of problem that we're coming across with. So not a huge amount of volume yet, but big aspirations. Oh, sorry, one thing I will add is we are now displacing power stations on the national grid system. When we were about 10 megawatts was what they decided was a displacement tool. Up until 10 megawatts, we were just a sort of R&D center, really. We were just sort of, it's nice to have, and we'll pay you a bit of money for it. It looks kind of cool. Now we're at 10 megawatts. We are now receiving the same price that a power station gets in the same market space, and that is 10 megawatts that they've not bought from somewhere else. And that's quite a big moment for us, because that's sort of this tipping point from exciting technology company to actual industry player.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Morten Lunde from Danish Technological Institute and the Consumer Work Package here in iPower. I much liked your presentation, and especially your point about the ones who win are the ones who understand the consumers. Yeah. You've given quite a few examples of industrial consumers in your presentation. Could you give maybe one or two examples of key value propositions for private consumers? what are you trying to sell to them?
Do you mean domestic consumers?
Yeah, domestic. Yeah, sorry.
We don't have an offering, if I'm honest, for domestic consumers yet. Now, a few reasons why we don't really have an offering for domestic consumers yet. One, the cost of our current package is not really applicable to residential consumers yet. And it will come down once we've looked to exhaust and mine as much as we can out of the industrial and commercial sector, because there is such a significant amount of volume to go out there. Two, I think to do a domestic proposition well, you need to layer it up with lots of other different types of benefits. You need to sort of create a home management system where you've got sort of, you know, music security, energy efficiency. You know, you're looking to sort of layer up a whole proposition where demand response forms a part of that. And as a small company, we don't necessarily have that sort of platform to go in there and sort of create that just yet. Two, there's not a huge amount of what I would consider flexible load in a house. Because the biggest transformational things you can create on the system is when you do things automated. A lot of time of use tariff trials, unfortunately, so that at a domestic level, when you start off, people begin to change 15% of peaks, but that quickly tails away when you don't keep people interested. So automated demand response is the way to create real system change. But then if you look on that, follow that sort of theory, there's not much to automate in a house, unfortunately. There might be a bit more in Denmark with heat pumps, because heat pumps are a really exciting technology there, and maybe with electrical vehicles. But other than maybe electric boiler, if you have an electric boiler and a fridge, there's not a huge amount you can automate there. I mean, I've had many arguments, not very exciting arguments, but about whether a washing machine is flexible. I'm not convinced it is, really, unless you just put your washing in at the end of the night and say, in the morning I need it to be done, but I don't want anything to wake me up at 3 in the morning telling me to wash my clothes. I mean, I struggle to do it anyway. So, I mean, at a domestic level, I think it's a very immature idea of what to do. I know in America they've built a lot more sort of home automation systems. You layer out the benefits. And that's what I mean by Nest. Nest has come at this not from a demand response context. It's come at it from a consumer nice product that delivers a nice thing and then looks to do demand response second. It's very hard to build a demand response only proposition to the domestic sector just yet.
The question might be short, but I don't know if the answer will be short. I'm Esteban Bondi from D2C, also part of iPower. You are delivering services to a transmission network.
Yes.
How does that sit with the distribution network and with the utilities? Because you are actually changing what they predicted would be consumed down at their level in order to deliver service higher up. So what's your relationship with them? What do they think about you?
I'll try and be as quick as I can. First, as a demand response business, you have to learn how to make a lot of friends. You have to be to be in a demand response business is about being as friendly with as many people as you can, because there are going to be inevitably be a lot of people involved in your supply chain and stakeholder management. So you have to be very busy out there the whole time speaking to people. The benefit of building a dynamic frequency response business is you're invisible on a half-hourly meter. Because we are making very small changes, we're turning as many things on as we are off. Frequency is a national issue, not a regional issue. Therefore, we are completely invisible on the from the distribution network and to a supply network. That's why it's a nice way to build a business. Not saying we're doing it sort of behind closed doors, but you are building businesses that doesn't have knock-on effects. So that's quite a nice thing about doing it. There is a lot of work going on in the UK about shared benefits, about how you, when distribution networks are having events, is at the same time transmission networks are having events, at the time when utility networks are having, what can you build a demand response proposition that looks to benefit from multiple value streams? Again, it's very complex and it's not getting anywhere very fast. That's why we've focused on frequency response, because it's a business where we can pay back good revenues and you can build this network of flexibility without having to have too many of these stakeholder relationships. But I do know if we were trying to do the same in other companies, we would have to have these relationships. But in the UK, we only have to have one contract, which is with the transmission system.